Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial, we take a look at how to automate the process of taking screenshots of your application. So there might be many reasons why you might want to take screenshots of your application. Some might include for example, documentation. Your application might be continually developed. So therefore, your application may change visually as you develop your application further. And of course, you'll want to take more screenshots and keep updating your documentation. So this is a good way of automating that process so that whenever you make any updates, you can straight away, very quickly, build your screenshots. So I'm going to make the general assumption that you've looked or you've seen some of the previous tutorials in this series. So you've got a general idea of how to set up a Django project and Pytest. So we're going to go across to the GitHub repository. The link's in the video description. Let's go ahead and download the last of part 4, for example. So I'm just going to download this and I'm just going to go ahead and get this part 4 started. And that's where I'll meet you next in Visual Studio Code with this project started. All right, so I've downloaded part 4 or the whole project here, downloaded part 4, extracted, and I've opened it now in Visual Studio Code. So in the previous tutorials, we were looking in the last tutorial, we were looking at integrating Selenium with Pytest. So now we're going to have a look at changing the code. So I'm just going to highlight this code out. We're not going to use that test anymore. I'm going to create a new test file here called test example 7.py. And we're now going to go through the process of creating screenshots. The process of actually creating screenshots is very simple. Selenium is going to provide us the tools to easily save screenshots or take screenshots and to then save them. So if we go over to the documentation here and just look for this save screenshot functionality here or function, you can see that this saves a screenshot of the current window to a PNG image file. And this is really the main core component that we're going to be utilizing to actually save our screenshots. So now we're just going to work around this to set up some simple examples of what we might want to do in order to take multiple screenshots of our website. So I'm going to build a function that's going to perform that action of taking screenshots and saving it. And then I can utilize that, of course, in any of my tests that I want to run that feature. So let's just bring in some of the tools that we're going to need. So we're going to build a new project folder. So we're going to import from the Python library OS. So if you're not familiar with this is just going to allow us to interact with our operating system file system to create files and folders and so on. Right, so we're also going to import time. Again, another core library in Python. So before we take the screenshot, we're just going to wait a couple of seconds before we take it, because it might be that the test is loading up a page. It might take a couple of seconds, probably not, to create that page or to get that page in focus before we take a screenshot. So time here is going to be utilized just to provide us in this case, just a second before we actually take the screenshot. And that's going to give the process of going to that page time to kind of load, if you like, before we take the screenshot. Right, so we're utilizing ultimately Pytest here to run tests. So we're going to bring that in as per normal. Now we have already pip installed Pytest if you are coming to this tutorial without watching the other tutorials. And in addition to that, if you have a look at the requirements, I've not gone through this yet in actual fact and installed or created a virtual environment yet. So you can see everything that's been installed here in the different versions. So I've got Selenium installed and then obviously Django and then Pytest Django. That's going to install Pytest and all the other elements you're going to need. So that's really the core installs here, but everything here is in this list that you're going to need. So actually I don't need to bring in the live test server here. We'll utilize Pytest for that. And then we're going to bring in the from Selenium, the WebDriver. So in the previous tutorial, we went through the process of utilizing WebDrivers to perform actions. So I'm going to make the assumption you understand what that provides us. Okay, so very quickly, so the WebDriver is going to allow us to perform tests. In this case, it's going to it can invoke a web browser and then perform tests. Selenium is essentially a driver, a way of performing actions automatically on a browser, for example. And we can do that in headless mode like we saw in the previous tutorial, so we don't actually have to bring up a window. Everything can just be done in the background. Right, so we're going to build a function here. I'm going to call this take screenshot. We're going to pass in two parameters, driver, that's the web driver, and the name. So that name is going to be, in this case, the name of the file that we want to make. Right, so before we take a screenshot, we're going to just wait a couple of seconds. So we're going to create or utilize time here and utilize sleep. Let me just change my tabs. Okay, so we're going to wait a second before we perform any actions. Right, so once we've done that, we'll then just go ahead and build a folder. Right, so we're going to use os make directory. Essentially, that's what we're doing here. So we're going to build a directory or make a directory. So let me just squeeze that over a bit. You can see here we're going to join the screenshot. So we're going to make a folder called screenshot in our root directory here. And then we're going to buddy that up with the actual directory name. So the name of that directory is going to come from what we're going to pass in to this function. And then we're going to say exist OK true. Right, so that is basically if the folder already exists, we're just going to ignore it and just carry on. If we have this exist OK false, then it's just going to cause a problem if the folder already exists. So exist OK true. If the folder exists, let's just move on. So next up, we'll actually perform the action of saving the screenshot. So driver.screenshot and then os.path join. So here we're basically just taking the folder screenshot and we're just going to pass in essentially the name of that file and everything's going to be saved nicely. So the actual function save screenshot is coming from the kind of WebDriver toolkit. That's where it's coming from. So to confirm it, maybe I didn't say the right thing here. So what we're doing here is we're just basically saving it in the right directory. So here we build the directory. Here we're going to save it in the screenshot/name directory. So we're going to specify the name of the file in a little while. Right, so now we've kind of built this functionality. It's going to perform the screenshot, take the screenshot, save it in the folder that's going to be created. Let's now just build a simple test that's going to utilize this function. So let's go ahead and build a new test. I'm just going to call this test open URL. So we're taking live server. If you remember what that is basically going to allow Pytest, or it's going to instruct Pytest to build a Python server in the background. Sorry, a Django server in the background. It's going to start a Django server. So once we've done that, let's set up our options for our web driver. So we're going to utilize Chrome here. So you're going to need the Chrome driver. So if you don't know what that is, head over to Google, type in Chrome web driver, download the web driver that you're going to need for whatever operating system you want to use. Here I'm using Chrome. I've got it installed. So I just download that. I'm going to put it right here and I'm going to run that from the folder. So that's my Chrome driver. So I'm setting up some options here. I want to run headless. So that means that you won't actually see the browser open at all. It's just going to run in the background. And I'm going to set, in this case, because I've not done this before, some arguments here. So let's go ahead and set, for example, some simple arguments, which I don't want to do. I want to set this up in a much more simple way. So let's just get this set up before I get rid of this problem as well. So let's just get this started. So I'm just going to create a new virtual environment to run all this in. Oh, what am I doing? mflag. So I'll create that. Let's go on and just activate that. And now I just go ahead and pip install all my dependencies, right? So requirements. So that's just going to install everything from the requirements. Give that a couple of seconds, and then we can just go ahead now and just build our test. So we'll start with a simple test, and then we'll move on to more complicated options, or just showcase some more options rather than thinking about it more complicated. All right, let's just go ahead and just make sure we can get something working. So I'm just going to build a new function here. I'm utilizing live server. So that's a tool in Pytest that's going to start the Django server in the background so we can perform a test. So I'm going to be utilizing the WebDriver, the Chrome WebDriver. That's going to be placed inside of this folder here. So dot referring to this folder. relative to the file here. Relative to the folder structure. So Chrome driver, and then driver.get. So we're just going to get this is just a basic Django application that has no app at all. So we're just going to get from the live server.url the admin, and then we're just going to make sure that the admin page, in the title of the admin page, it says this, and that will just indicate that the page is working. So let's go ahead and Pytest this. So it looks like it's working okay. You can see it popping up there, and then performing the action, and our test is working. Right, so now let's bring in our screenshot. So we're going to go again. We don't need this anymore. We don't need to insert anything. We're now going to bring in our screenshot function, take a screenshot of our admin page. Okay, so what we're going to need to do then is just call our function, take screenshot. We're going to pass in the driver, and then just direct to the screenshot folder, and then the fact that we want to save the file as admin.png. Right, so let's now go ahead and run our test, see if this works. So the window comes up, you can kind of half see that, and we now have a folder here. So screenshot. Okay, right, so screenshot, and then admin.png. Right, so let's just change this here. Let's call this admin, right? So now we should have a folder called screenshot admin. So let's just start again. So now we're going to set up some Chrome options. So we define from WebDriver Chrome options. So we set this up into options variable. We're now going to make some changes. So we're going to have headless mode. So we're not going to bring up the actual browser every time we want to make a test. We're going to have this, like I said, in the background. And this time we're going to change the window size. So this is just one of the arguments that we can pass in, the window size. And of course you can change this. Let's just change this to, do that again. We can change this to whatever size we want. We'll do that in a second. So then we go ahead and just run our Chrome driver again, utilizing the options. So we pass in the options. So these are the options that we've chosen. And now we can just pass over, we get the driver, so driver.get. And so we are basically now just defining, this should be Chrome driver. In actual fact, we'll change that in a second. So we're just getting the URL again, and then we're going to take a screenshot, but this time passing Chrome driver, remember? So we just need to change that. I'll see that onto there. So now we've just got a few options. So let's just change this to a bigger screen, for example. So just maybe a full HD, 1080. Let's just run the test again. So this time, I'd imagine it's going to be overridden, but you can see this is a much bigger screen shot. Okay, so you can see that's happening. Let's go back. Right, so now we've got that in place. It's worth saying that we can perform these same actions on Chrome as we can do Firefox, but it's probably the case that you want to set up multiple tests, you want to set up multiple screenshots maybe at different sizes, because if you're going to make some documentation, maybe you want to make a larger screenshot like I was saying, and then maybe a smaller screenshot too. And of course, what we're going to do here is just utilize the skills that we've learned from previous tutorials, and we're just going to apply it to this situation. Now, this might not be the final kind of setup you might want to use, but it's just building upon our knowledge from previous tutorials. All right, so I've gone ahead and just commented out this section here. So let's go ahead now. So we're going to set up parameters like we did in the previous tutorial where we ran Firefox and Chrome on all of our tests. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to pass in just an example, of course. So we're going to run this, so Chrome 1920, Chrome 411. So we're going to have a HD screenshot and then a mobile phone screenshot. We're going to run Firefox as well, just to kind of showcase that. Now, if we want to run Firefox, we're going to need the driver for that, the web driver. So you're going to need the Gecko driver. So go over to Google if you haven't already got this and get yourself a web driver for Firefox. I'm just going to slip this into my folder here. So that's the geckodriver.exe. Right. So now we've got that in place. So this is going to be our fixture. We're going to call this driver initialize. So we're going to take in some parameters here. So if the parameter equals Chrome 1912, so essentially we're just going to cycle through all these options here. So these parameters will represent an if statement here, and then we'll run a yield. So we're going to kind of move through each of these options for every single test we do. So if params equals that, it does. What we're going to do is we're going to get our WebDriver, we're going to make it headless, we're going to set the size to full HD, and then we'll go ahead and set up our WebDriver, pass in the options over here, and now we're ready. So all we need to do now is just send some information over so we can maybe change the file name. So here I'm going to send to the class the browser information, and that's going to be that string there. So that's the string I'm going to pass over to the class so that I can change the name of the file. And we'll see that happen in a minute. I'll point that out. So just following this path, we're just going to set up another if. Of course, we're just duplicating code here. This is just for an example. So headless, this time window size of 411823, and then a WebDriver setup again. And this time we're going to send across a string Chrome and then the new dimensions for this test. So we can do the same thing for Firefox. I'm just going to outline this with Firefox. So headless, we're going to use the gecko drivers this time. And then to the browser, just going to say Firefox. Right, so we're going to send across that to the class. Now then we're going to pass all this information over. So we're now going to yield. So essentially we're going to just cycle through this. Every test we perform, it will perform that's set here in the parameters. So for one test that we set up, it's going to run this 3 times. Right, so we're going to close that. So we close the WebDriver, just tidy things up. And now let's go ahead and utilize it. So we have set this scope to class. So we're going to need to call this before we set up our class in order to run this fixture. So we call that, we call this fixture by the function name here, driver init. Okay, so we've now got that. So now we're creating a new class called screenshot, and we're going to now run this. So function screenshot admin, this is what it's going to be called. So we're going to take in live server again. So that sets up the Django server in the background via Pytest. And now we're going to self.getDriver. So we're going to get the admin page again, same thing again. This time we're going to take a screenshot. So this time you can see we're using self.browser. So here we're saying self.browser. So this is referring to this information we're passing across. And so it's going to say Firefox or Chrome. And you can see I'm utilizing this to build my file name. Okay, so in the admin folder, we're going to build a file called admin plus the browser name, which is going to be Firefox or Chrome 14.411.png. Right, so now we've got that. You can, of course, run a test if you want to. Underneath that, you may be kind of integrating these screenshots within your tests. And there we go. So that should run okay. Now, it won't run okay. And I'm going to see if you can see what the problem is going to be. But if I run Pytest here, it's not actually going to work. No tests are going to run. Can't find them. So what I probably haven't explicitly said is that by default, the test runner for Pytest is going to look for classes that start with test. And then in addition to that, excuse me, it's going to also look for functions that begin with test. So if I did this, for example, and run Pytest again, well, it should run. Yep, there we go. So it's picking up a test. It's going to run the first test. Notice that it runs the first test and then it runs a separate test. This is because we're using different browser windows, right? So it runs essentially a fresh set of tests there. You can see the second test is run. 3 has passed, and you can see now I've got this new folder called screenshot admin, and I've got the different screenshots for the different sizes, full HD, and so on, and then the Firefox. Okay, so the default Firefox, or the default size, I think is like 1280. Just need to check the manual for that for the default size. It's around about that size off the top of my head. Oh, actually, it probably just tells me if I right click. No, I can't do that. Oh, it's down here. Okay, 1366 by 686. There we go. So that's the image size right there. Okay, So you can see it's working okay, but you've seen that I've changed the naming system. So it might be, let's just change this back. So what we can do here in Pytest is we can just tell it what other files to look for to run tests. So this is just going to be called screenshot underscore admin. So this is a class and function. So there are 3 parameters that we can set up here in Pytest for the test runner. So we can make it look for folders, folder names. We can make it look for classes, and we can define the function names as well. So in our Pytest INI file, you can see here that Python files. So we're looking for Python files that begin with test underscore something. So these files here, that's why it's running tests within these files. So we can override that if we want to, or add to that if we want to. So what we can do here is we can define also Python classes and then also Python functions. So, we don't need a comma here. So test underscore start or screenshot. So that's going to look for classes called screenshot and also functions called screenshot something. So this is just for the purpose of this test. You might need to kind of change this for your classes because I'm not defining test here. So you're probably going to need to add to that test, for example, underscore star in order to get yours working. So let's run this again. We have updated the names to screenshot. So I've saved that. So let's go ahead now and see if we can run our tests. And it's round our tests. It's now running our tests, and the outcome is exactly the same. Exactly the same. Or is it? Oh yeah, there we go. So if you are following the Selenium and Pytest tutorial series, we've learned a little bit more in this case. We've learned how to take screenshots, or the general principles of taking screenshots and managing them. And then in addition to that, a little bit about the test runner and finding files and folders of classes and functions so that we can run tests and how we can extend that. And we've learned a little bit more about the options that we can include, in this case, window sizes and screenshots. There we go. So just a small snippet really. Hopefully that was useful. That was Pytest, utilizing Selenium as well, and also the Django framework to take screenshots. So hopefully it was useful. Thank you for listening, and hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.